Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fireside Paranormal Podcast. My name is Jordan Cline, and I have another fun show planned out tonight. We have author Ron Murphy. He is, like I said, an author, a folklorist, a researcher, an investigator. We're going to talk about a lot of fun stuff today. I do want to start today off with our featured story. Now, a featured story is a story that you send in. You, the listener, send in a story for us to talk about on the air. It is something that I am really excited about. I love having these stories on. I would love to continue doing them. So please, please, please send me your stories. If you don't want to be on the air with me, if you don't want to send in a recorded story, you can type it out and send it, and I will read it, or I'll have somebody else read it. But we love having these stories as part of the program. This week's story actually comes in from a past guest, Mr. Tom Mihawk.
Hi, Tom Mihawk from Pittsburgh. Have an interesting story from the Moundsville Penitentiary. Probably about 10 years ago now, I went with a friend of mine in for one of the overnight ghost hunts. For anybody that's actually been in the prison, you'll know that as soon as you walk in through the lobby and go through that first door, there is a door to the right, which actually leads upstairs to the second floors. It's more of an administration area that at the time they were renovating. It was not an area we were actually permitted to be in, but we decided to sneak into the door and go upstairs. We locked the door behind us just to kind of make sure that nobody caught us, and went up there and did a little bit of investigating. We sat down in the room with the only light coming in was the moonlight. After about 10-15 minutes, we weren't really getting any activity. Then all of a sudden, we saw a shadow walking across the far wall. Thought that was interesting because we were the only two people in there. We were sitting down, so there was no one else there to make a shadow. After about 5 or 10 minutes of watching the shadow move back and forth on the wall, it exited to the right out into the small hall that's between the room we were in and a far room. So we decided to get up and tag along, see if we could follow it. Now, we followed it to the secondary room, and as I said at the time, they were doing a lot of renovations, so there was a lot of sheet metal and scrap things on the floor. When we were entering the second room, we actually tried to pull the door shut, but there was so much sheet metal and debris underneath the door jamb, we couldn't budge it. So we decided to forget about it. We just went into the room. At that point, we were getting a lot of hits on our K2 meter, mainly in the center of the room. Now, there was no electricity there, so we couldn't really explain what was making the readings or what was making the meter light up. About a minute or two being into the room, unexpectedly, the steel door that we could not budge slammed shut. At that point, we started to get more readings on the K2 meter, and we were able to actually, moving the meter around, the meter readings we were getting were actually in the shape of a person. So we would go up to about 5 feet high or 6 feet where you would think of somebody's head being, go back down another side. If we step to the right, step to the left, we got nothing. But when we went back to that initial spot where as if somebody was standing there, we could almost trace a person with the K2 meter. It would continually light up to red. After a few more minutes, we didn't get any more readings, so we went over, and it took both of us probably about 3 to 4 minutes of just pushing all of our weight on that door to get it open. So, unfortunately, we never got to go back up to that area because, as I said, that really wasn't a part of the penitentiary that we were permitted to be in. So if anyone from the pen is listening, I'm sorry. But it was very interesting because to see a shadow, moving through that room and then having a door slam like that when we couldn't physically move it, that was quite interesting, especially after one of the most famous sightings in the prison being the Shadow Man, which was caught in the picture by, I think, Paulie Gear was the person. So thought that was a pretty interesting story. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Tom. And again, if you guys want to have your story as our featured story, just send it into firesideparanormalpodcast@gmail.com. We do have a quick announcement. We have an event coming up called Hidden Marietta Paranormal Exposition. In the ballroom of the haunted and historic Lafayette Hotel, we will gather together all those who delight in the supernatural. From hands-on activities to speakers teaching you the secrets of haunted objects and locations, they have a unique array of creepy creative merchandise and a lot of things to experience and learn. There will be tours of the Lafayette also available. Advance tickets are $12 per person. Tickets at the door are $15 per person. And this event is coming January 29th, 2022. And that is going to be an earlier show. It's going to be 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'm going to have a table set up to record your stories. It's going to be a lot of fun. Do a little meet and greet. Can't wait to see you guys there. I want to get to our guest tonight. Join me by the fire as we welcome Ron Murphy. He has been investigating the stuff of nightmares for over 30 years. He has investigated the things that go bump in the night and meticulously researched the historical and psychological context of myths and legends from around the world. Mr. Murphy seeks to uncover the archetypal precedent of the monsters that haunt our collective thoughts. Ron, you with us?
I am with us, yeah, with everybody. Let's put it that way.
I am with us.
Yinzers, I guess, here in Western Pennsylvania. But I want to let you know that I'm very flattered to be on your show, and thanks for having me as a guest. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, like I told you off the air, you have come highly recommended, and I told you, before some of the context that I wanted to talk about today, and I've had a lot of messages requesting this as well. So you are blessed and highly favored today.
Well, I appreciate that very, very much. I know when, like, a lot of times, life tends to get in the way. I have children, you have children, but it's good to gather around that proverbial fire, as you said, and discuss things that go bump in the night. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So tell me about what you do. You are a man of many, many talents, and you've been about everywhere. So how would you classify what you do?
You know what? We'll just say a Renaissance man. I think that I've always wanted to use that term, and I've never used it before. So basically, I grew up in a small town, Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in Blairsville. I was a child of the 1970s. And I remember, listening to KDKA radio. Well, very few people do that anymore. That was the podcast in the day, whenever you used to turn on the radio. And it was about once a month. Stan Gordon would appear on the John Cigna show, which was, I believe, was either Friday or Saturday nights around 9 o'clock. And we always liked to listen to Stan Gordon. And my mom would, turn on the radio. Boy, this sounds like it's like something from the 1950s. But no, honest to goodness, in the 1970s, we did this as well, too. But we would listen to Stan Gordon's updates on Bigfoot and UFO reports. And what was so awesome is that my little town of Blairsville, which is very nondescript, had about 2 streetlights at the time, nothing going on there. But all of a sudden, Bigfoot was now being sighted on the outskirts of town. And my mother we would listen to the reports, and I was just a little kid, of course, I'm 5 or 6 years old. And the next day, my mother would load us up, my brother and I, up in the vehicle, and then we would go to the places Stan Gordon reported that there were Bigfoot sightings. So it was a great time to be a kid,
Oh, wow.
There was no question, there was no question that Bigfoot was out there. It's just if we would have the ability to find him, that was my childhood. And I would, I was a voracious reader. I would go to my library when people could go to libraries and not have to use the internet, and find books on Bigfoot, find books on the abominable snowmen. And I went to Catholic school. I went to St. Simon and Jude in Blairsville, and I am convinced that one of the nuns at the school had to be a closet cryptozoologist or paranormal investigator, because this little library in this little school in little Blairsville, Pennsylvania, had a great selection of not only Bigfoot and cryptid books, but also books on ancient aliens by von Däniken. And it was a great time to be a kid. It really was. I mean, this was also a time when In Search of was on TV, and That's Incredible was on TV. So it was a great time to be this kid that had an imagination. And, I would gather my friends in the neighborhood and we would have a Bigfoot club. And in the summertime, we would do our own little investigations. It was just a good time to be alive.
That is awesome. Now,
Yeah.
did you ever stop that?
No, well, I'll tell you, high school starts. Okay, now, I have to now go to a public high school, and I know that you're going to find this hard to believe, and the listeners are going to find this hard to believe, but back in 1980s, girls did not find guys that looked for Bigfoot very interesting back then. So, I look. I am as shocked as you are, my friend. I am as shocked as you are. So I had to now kind of put my Bigfoot obsession in the closet.
How did we ever get married?
Yeah, exactly. I'm telling you, I look back and it immediately went to looking for Bigfoot and playing with G.I. Joe figures to now all of a sudden it's like in a high school and now everybody's in a clique and I didn't seem to belong anyplace. And it was just a very awkward time for me to be around. I don't understand how this happened, but nobody was talking about Bigfoot whenever I was in high school, and I had a miserable time in high school as well too. I wasn't a very good student. I just needed that, that kind of reassurance that I had whenever I was a kid, wandering through the woods and everything. And now we had to sit down to mathematics and learn how to write out checkbooks. High school is not a good time for anybody, I don't think. But then something magical happens, my friend. It's going to be the next phase of my life. So even though that I was a terrible high school student, I was still good enough to get into the University of Pittsburgh. And I remember, sitting there in my Anthropology 101 class, and there was a chapter in one of the books written by a real professor who, the book was like $100 at the bookstore. This was something that was, this was something that was reviewed, peer reviewed.
Uh-huh.
It was something like, you download off the internet or off of Amazon or anything like that. This is an honest to goodness, a college textbook. And it was interesting because one of the chapters discussed the possibility of a remnant hominid, such as a Gigantopithecus, possibly being alive into historical years, and that may have given rise to the legend of the Yeti. Now, this was the first time that I had encountered anything about these kind of ape-like creatures in a book that since I was, in grade school. Then all of a sudden, it was as if Bigfoot entered the room, took a seat down beside me, and then asked me, "Now what do you do with me?" And that was like an epiphany to me, because now I could take this kind of fringe interest and look at it from an academic perspective. And ever since that time, that's what I've been doing. I have a bachelor's in literature, and I, started to see these things that look like Bigfoot and the Epic of Gilgamesh, and in Beowulf, and the character of Grundle.
Okay,
and you keep on moving up. Yeah, very strange things occurring. And then I went to graduate school up at Indiana University of Pennsylvania for history. And, as I'm poring over medieval manuscripts, I'm now finding in the margins, the marginalia, these hair-covered creatures, that walk on two legs, that sort of look like us. And now all my focus, all this childhood energy that I had, all this kind of romanticism that I had towards Bigfoot, I can now do something with it. Now I can look at it on a perspective of being an archetype. And, Carl Jung talked about the idea of the collective unconscious and the creation of archetypes. And now I've kind of ensconced myself in this sort of area of cryptozoology and paranormal activities that very few people are in. I'm trying to connect the dots from all these eyewitness encounters that are happening in the modern age, and trying to trace them throughout history and find out what the archaeological record has to say about it.
That is awesome. Now, do you focus primarily on Bigfoot, or do you branch out into other types of cryptids with that same desire?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at the idea, like I said, of the archetype. And that means it has to be a symbol that means something to humanity. For instance, the chupacabra isn't actually an archetype. It has not so formulated itself into the collective unconscious of humanity that it's there for every culture. That's something that's very specific geographically and everything. So whenever I look at the idea of the archetype, and these are the books that I've written on the archetype. So the first book that I wrote on the archetype was on mermaids, because mermaids are one of these, archetypes that exists throughout the world. The mermaid is the same in Australia as it is in Africa, as it is in Europe.
Yeah.
There might be some regional changes. There might be some colloquialisms to this particular creature, but for the most part, it is essentially the same. So that was the first book that I wrote, and that was on the suggestion from my daughter Willow, who said, you write about all this stuff, because the first book that I wrote was called The Unexplained World of the Chestnut Ridge, and I kind of went into my research around here about the various types of investigations I've done on Bigfoot and Dogman and everything, and it was an exhaustive process. Writing a book is a very exhaustive process. It requires a lot of research, and I thought that was going to be the first and last book that I ever wrote, because it was just so time consuming. And then my daughter Willow said to me, she said, you write about all this Bigfoot crap. Did you think you could write about mermaids? Because she was really into mermaids. And I thought, I had never thought about it before. So I started to do some, cursory research, and I found this whole world out there about the mermaid. So it was my daughter Willow, who was probably about the age of 6 years old at the time, that spurred me to write about these archetypes from around the world. So then I wrote the book on mermaids, and then the second book that I wrote in that series was on Dogman, tracking the werewolf through history.
Okay.
Then the next book I wrote after that was on Bigfoot, or on Wildman, tracking Bigfoot through history. So you can see there's a little bit of we have a theme going on here. And then I wrote a book on ghosts, on vampires, on aquatic creatures of the Great Lakes, and then on fairies. And the last one I wrote, I just finished up my series, which is on witches. So I think throughout that whole entire gamut right there, we kind of can fit everything that people are looking for in the cryptid world or in the paranormal world somewhere within those schemes that I wrote about.
Well, you definitely got to have a lot of interest on either one. I mean, you pretty much hit the gamut with it. Now, I know a lot of folks have messaged me asking about the Fae.
Yes.
So, what can you tell us a little bit about that, so we can give them some?
I was never much interested in fairies, to tell you the truth, because I always saw them as something that was part of the Victorian imagination. These were Tinkerbells with diaphanous wings. These were the diminutive Marilyn Monroes that were there to serve as the foil to the animated hero. That's what it was. And then I was in graduate school, and I wrote a paper on fairies. I was going to write a paper on something that was interesting to me, so I thought, well, let me try fairies. And then I start exploring this incredible world, and it is fascinating, because the fairy, when we think of them, of course it's part of the European imagination, but if you look at Australia, and Australia is one of these interesting places, because it is an island continent, it's isolated from most of the world, but they have a very vast tradition whenever it comes to the fairies.
Really?
They have something called the Wangina, which is, it actually, if you look it up, it's kind of scary looking, because it looks almost like a gray alien, these very large almond-shaped eyes, that they exist in the dream time. It's something that you have to go to their world. But as I connect the dots, this dream time of the Australians is almost like the other world of the Europeans, or the netherworld of the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples. It's different names. It's a different word in the different vernaculars, but it all means the same thing. And the other Australian fairy that they have is something called the Mimus. And this creature lives in the space between spaces. And every now and then they'll kind of bleed into our world. And as I'm looking at, First Nations folklore and Native American folklore, I look at all this from around the world, in Scandinavian folklore and African folklore, and even in Asian belief systems. We have these kind of creatures that live on the periphery, that they've been here forever. Sometimes they interact with human beings. And I think the word we should use instead of the fae or instead of fairies is going with the word elemental. Because they seem to be intrinsically tied to the elements around us. And even Paracelsus, this great alchemist in the Renaissance, he is the one that coined the word zinc, because he believed in mineralogy in treating the human body of disease. But he believed that all the elements out there had an attending intelligence to it. So if you look at the water, that is the domain of the mermaid, but of course a different name. He also came up with the name gnome for the earth-dwelling elementals, the intellects there. So it's a fascinating world. It would take hours to go through everything like that. But in my belief, what I have come to now understand, at least through my research, if we're going to throw all skepticism aside and we're going to just come out and say what I've discovered through my research, I think that when we're dealing with fairies or we're dealing with cryptids, a lot of the things that we are neglecting to look at is the possibility that these are elements from the fairy world.
Okay. With all cryptids, you say?
Well, with many cryptids, because what we need to look at here is this. And this is going to be, just that kind of very bland, academic talk here. Biologically speaking, are we to believe that in places like Pennsylvania, there's the possibility of several apex predators existing in one area within, 5 miles from a Walmart? See, that's very difficult to contend with, because these things have to eat, they have to produce little babies and everything like that, so they have to live. And we would see a lot of evidence from these things. But also in the realm of biology are things like infrasound and pheromones that can impact the way people see the world and by the way people interpret the world. So I'm thinking, whenever we look at the European tradition of fairies, they had something called glamour, the ability to change their shape. Other than shape-shifting, literal shape-shifting, they have the ability to make the witness see something that was not there. So, are we talking about an infrasound? Are we talking about a intelligence able to act upon the human psyche so that person is seeing something that's not there, but in his mind, he believes that it is there? So is something that's capable of producing an image of an 8-foot-tall, hairy wild man, is that capable? Possibly. Or a dog-man creature. One witness I interviewed, he was taking a walk up on the Chestnut Ridge, and he claimed to come across two figures that he called brownies. Now, in medieval folklore, brownies were these little fairies that are inhabited a particular habitation. They're usually, around a particular house or geographical area. But, Harry Potter kind of brings these things to the forefront, so they become popularized. For lack of a better word, he called them brownies. But whatever they were these two figures, these two small figures. He couldn't remember if they were wearing clothes or not, but if they were wearing clothes, he said that they matched the environment so closely that they appeared to be naked. So some sort of camouflage going on. But he saw these two creatures just kind of rustling and jostling in this little forest glade up on the Chestnut Ridge. And this went on for a few minutes. And the one creature caught sight of him and took off, and it vanished into the side of a hill. Now, there was no hole or any kind of opening in the side of the hill. It just kind of went into the side of the hill. And what was interesting, he said the other creature went through a variety of shape shifts, and before it assumed the form of a very large bird, and it flew off. And I thought, well, my goodness, the Chestnut Ridge people are seeing thunderbirds up there. People are reporting thunderbirds all the time.
No.
But, you know, if there's a bird out there that's the size of a thunderbird, not only would they appear on radar, you know, but, you know, you would think about what birds, you know, generally do. And one of these things flying over a neighborhood and they take a poop, nobody's reporting that their Prius windshield is broken by bird droppings, you know. So there's something going on there than just physicality. Although I do believe in physical things as well, too. I believe there is a physical nature to these things. But there's also something fundamentally going on that is psychologically based as well.
Okay, so, you know, we talked about Chestnut Ridge there. You know, Bigfoot is a common sighting in that area, correct?
Yes, correct. That's correct.
Okay, so are we saying like that could be an elemental spirit? Do you think that like Bigfoot would be a living, breathing creature, or do you think that might be an elemental spirit that's going through? Because I've heard several theories on Bigfoot itself, on what it could be, from alien to fairy to...
Sure. Well, I think that Bigfoot has shown itself that it tends to be a living, breathing thing, but that does not mean that it's not from another dimension.
No.
That does not mean that it's not extraterrestrial, and it also doesn't mean that it's not from the world of the Fae. You know, it could be all of these things at one time, and then, because we're dealing with the world of the Fae, it could be all these things at one time and then nothing at all. You know, that's really the curiosity that goes on here, and that's the conundrum, and that's the mire that we have to sort through as investigators. Whenever I was in graduate school, I got to study in Scotland for a while, and there's a place in Scotland in the Highlands called Ben Macdui, and this is the place where a reported gray man has been seen. Now, for all intents and purposes, the gray man is a Bigfoot type of character.
Okay, I was getting ready to ask.
Yeah, it's a very large hair-covered creature that can assume very different sizes, you know, sometimes appearing as a true giant, some 20 feet tall. But now this is where it gets into this kind of gray area. Well, no pun intended for the gray man. But the reason why it's called the gray man is sometimes it can assume the form of a gray mist, so it kind of eludes people that are looking for him. These are very interesting, and this is, you know, the gray man goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So when we're dealing with places in Europe, especially if it has, you know, the precedent for an oral tradition, we're only seeing glimpses of what it's now evolved into, because it probably has been there, at least in that consciousness there, for a few thousand years. In the same way with the First Nations people, and the same way with the Native American people. I mean, in Canada, there is in some tribes in Western Canada, the Bigfoot is seen as a messenger that straddles two worlds at once. It straddles the mundane world here and the world of the miraculous, or the world of the metaphysical, and it only comes to impart wisdom to people around here. So we see that, you know, especially whenever, you know, the white colonists came in, we appropriated a lot of these traditions, but we eliminated the supernatural from it. So it becomes nothing more than a physical manifestation. And that's kind of sad, because Bigfoot has always been much more than just some sort of hulking ape that's going through the woods.
Yeah. Now, you know, with what you had said before on how it could be, you know, many things or nothing and all at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a line of extraterrestrial that we see all these elementals in, that they could be really, you know, an extraterrestrial being, and that's why we're seeing these creatures everywhere, or
well,
reports of these creatures?
Yeah. I don't really care for the word extraterrestrial.
Okay.
What happens if we would use the word ultra-terrestrial? What happens if we were dealing something from this world, but we just simply don't understand it? And I'll tell you a quick story.
Okay.
This was shortly after the time of William Shakespeare. So we're talking about in the 1600s. There was a place in Scotland called Aberfoyle. I mean, it's still there, of course. It's near the place of Stirling, where William Wallace fought his famous Battle of Stirling Bridge. But there was a minister there named Robert Kirk. He was a reverend, and he talked about going out on a walk in the forest and he came across a hill, and on the side of the hill there was a breach, there was an opening, and there was a light that was shining through the hole. And he got up the nerves and he went to the hole and he peered into it, and inside were different types of creatures. One creature that he had spoken with was a very tall, human-looking creature that we would definitely call a Nordic. That's what we would use.
Uh-huh.
But there were also other creatures in there as well, too. And if this would have happened in the 21st century, we would probably say that they were greys, but he didn't have those terms to use.
Yeah.
So he just called them, something else. So he believed that what he had seen was a glimpse into the world of the fairy. And he went on to have interactions with this world up until the day he died. Now, not only did he, well, some people say he never died because there was never any body. They say that he actually became part of that world. That's part of the romance of Robert Kirk. But he claimed that, he was a minister. He claimed that the fairies were just part of God's universe. Only atheists are unable to see the fairy world. And this kind of thought went up until the time of spiritualism in the late 19th, early 20th century. And we look at characters like Harry Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. They all believed that the fairy world was all around us, and we simply have to be tuned into that frequency in order to see it.
I'd never heard that before.
Yeah. So we're dealing with, I think this comes down to a lot of odd culture. I think that if we would go back in time, we would view, we would adapt, and we would sort of define what we were seeing by what was going on in the world around us. So a pre-scientific community would, of course, see these creatures as part of the world around them. Think about an agricultural world where you depend upon the world around you to keep you alive and sustain you.
Yeah.
Of course, these are all attributes of the world around you. But as we move on and we become more scientific, now we start seeing things through different eyes. Was this really a hill, or was this a spacecraft that landed and kind of opened up its port and allowed this man in? And did he actually go into the fairy realm, or was he abducted, never to be seen again? These are great things. But the idea of abductions by fairies is very, very old. And the idea of abduction by aliens is fairly new, but it's still, as I said before, connecting the dots. There are so many similarities. You cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah,
There is something going on that connects all these stories, my friend.
Now, with some of our listeners, I know we have some folks that are new into the paranormal. How would you explain what an ultra-terrestrial is?
It would be something that would be part of this world, but it's beyond our comprehension as of now. And also, because it's ultra or over or above, it's also really doesn't necessarily have to abide by our physics either. There is something going on with this particular creature, this preternatural state, if you will, something that makes it metaphysical, something that makes it beyond our reasoning, that it can straddle two worlds at once and can transcend our world. So now we get into the idea of interdimensionality.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's something, if we were talking about this, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago, a decade ago, people would think that we were nuts. People were thinking about this as, science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're hearing things about metaverses, and we're thinking of things about alternative universes and everything else. And it seems that our knowledge now, our physics now of how everything works, there are other universes out there within our universe, and I compare it to peeling an onion. It's like each layer, sometimes the layers are translucent and see-through and porous, and maybe things can flow from one layer into the other layer. It's very possible. But there's something going on there that is yet to be determined, I guess. So this changes our outlook on everything. Are we seeing ghosts? Are these really the deceased souls of people that have passed on? Or are these lives that are taking place in a world that overlaps our world, and every now and then we get a glimpse into that world. These are fascinating things to think about. Is there a Bigfoot out there that's part of this world, or does it reside in another world and every now and then just kind of, wanders into our world, and vice versa? I mean, is it possible that people are out there going on hikes and they step into another world and they see things that are there, whether it be a Thunderbird or the Loch Ness Monster, what have you, and it's only a brief rip in time that they're looking into, and it's not part of this actual world. It's it's quite a question that we have to ask ourselves, and a lot of researchers throw these kind of points of view out because they're really not quantitative. You can't lay them down, you can't examine them, and it's very hard to use the scientific method whenever it comes to these kind of things because we're dealing with questions. But as I will tell you, and as I will tell the listeners, at the end of the day, no matter how much research you're dealing in the world of the paranormal, and I don't care what you're investigating, whether it is, mermaids or the coelacanth. Well, I'm sorry, not the coelacanth. I guess the megalodon, I should say, because the coelacanth is actually, we kind of have him categorized now. But when we're dealing with all these kind of strange and unknown animals, we're always going to be left with a question mark. Very rarely are you ever left with a period at the end of the day because there are so many more rabbit holes that show up. Once you go down one rabbit hole, at the bottom of that rabbit hole, there's always going to be another way and another intersection to follow down. So it's part of who we are, and that's really what keeps me going. I think that these creatures that we're looking for, whether they be Bigfoot or whether they be dogmen, whether there's something that we feel as is a guiding spirit or something that is out of nightmares, whatever they are embroidered into our DNA. They make us human. And we need these creatures out there to stay alive as much as they need us to stay alive. I love going out into the woods and investigating. I love that. But I also find this wilderness in the gray matter of the mind just as fascinating as well, too. I think that we must include psychology and the human outlook in our research as much as looking for footprints and things as well, because it's almost as if whenever we see these creatures, there is an unspoken agreement that it's going to allow themselves to be seen, and we are going to allow ourselves to witness it. It's almost as if there's a circuit, and it has to flick a switch, and we have to flick a switch, and it has to be this perfect circuit that it's aligned in order for the experience to take place. And I think the people that have seen these things, and I do a lot of conferences where people come up to me and they say, "You don't believe in this crap, do you?" And I said, I keep an open mind, and they will walk away, and then they'll come back a little bit later with tears in their eyes, recounting some sort of experience that they have impacted them mind, body, and spirit. So these people are not lying. There's something going on out there in the world that is impacting certain members of the human race to a point that we have to include this into not only psychology, but in zoology and biology and everything else. Something is going on out there that is not attainable simply by dismissing it as, skepticism or illusions or whatever. Something is really going on out there.
So when you're talking about like these areas where, our dimensions can be thin, and I really don't want to sound like the cliche, the thinning of the veil or anything like that, because
right.
That can be super cliche. But areas like the Chestnut Ridge or Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where all this kind of happened, do you think that there are areas where, let's say, our dimension may be thin to where another dimension could bleed through, and it just happens to be in certain areas around the world?
Right. I think the point that you just raised here really is the crux of everything that's going on, and you did it brilliantly, I might add. What we are dealing with here, I think we have to look at the geography of an area. In my book, The Unexplained World of the Chestnut Ridge, does open up in the first chapter discussing the geography, because we are on the Appalachian Plateau here, and so is Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And we have to deal with certain aspects of this. There is a lot of limestone in this area, and limestone is also one of these conduits whenever we talk about ghostly activities as well too. Another type of geology that we have to look at is granite, and New Hampshire is the granite state. And one of the most famous abduction cases is Barney and Betty Hill, and that took place in New Hampshire as well too.
Yeah.
Look at the places like in the Great Rift Glen up there where Loch Ness is. Again, geography. And think about, also with the idea of the Great Pyramids, not only in Egypt, but also in South America and Central America. This all depends upon the geology around them. So is it possible that whenever the ancients talked about the use of ley lines, and a lot of people overlook this, but when we look at ley lines, especially in Europe, we often see on these power points in the earth, as they are called, that there would be a pagan temple that was there. This was the site of some sort of power that had to be commemorated.
Huh.
Now, not only were pagan temples erected, but after Christianity came in and paganism was destroyed, Christian temples and churches would now be built upon these sites. So even in the advent of Christianity, the church saw these places as powerful earth energy sites, if you will. And I think that there is something to be said that in certain areas around this world, there is, again, not to sound cliche, but there are certain areas around this world that allow for portals to exist or glimpse into another world, or, I'm going to cringe, but I'm going to have to say it, or places where the veil is thinner than other places.
You always hate to say it, but I mean, how else do you explain it?
How else do you explain it? That's right. Whenever I do this talk, whenever I do talks on Halloween, I also have to say, Halloween, this is the time whenever the veil is thinnest between two worlds. But it's hard not to talk like that as well, too, because even in certain Eastern cultures, it's that time again, or right around October 31st, whenever, even in their cultures, they'll say the veil between this world and the next world is at its thinnest. So maybe it requires a perfect storm, my friend. Maybe it requires not only a particular place, a particular geographical location, but it might also rely on certain times of the year as well, too. Mm. That is why, places like Newgrange are aligned on the sunrise on October 31st. Or why, the pyramids are aligned with certain stars and such. It might mean that there has to be a perfect storm. And when I talked about frequency a little bit earlier, is it possible that the universe aligns or tunes to a certain frequency at certain times of the year? Very possible. I mean, it's extremely possible. And we talk about, certain types of religions and certain types of healings that, the idea of chakra alignment, that's all based upon the idea of frequency. And maybe frequency is something that we are not really looking into. I wrote a self-help book about 2 years ago called Human Harmonics. And that's one of the things that I discussed in there as well, too. The idea that we are always surrounded by frequency. And it might be that the world always is generating this certain type of frequency, this kind of steady frequency. But we as human beings have decided to step out of that frequency. Now people are, don't go to bed at night, and we work all night and we sleep all day, and everything is off. Our circadian rhythm is off. We have, we have formed the world into our own image. We have destroyed almost all nature around us. And we have stepped out of that frequency that is part of who we are, a part of the cosmos. And maybe we just simply have to step back into it, and maybe everything that we call paranormal will suddenly now make sense.
Yeah, and that's a great way to look at it. I've heard that theory before, with the frequencies going on. And I am really curious because you did touch on one thing, and I know you do investigation. How often do you do investigation still?
I try to do it at least, several times a year to get out there. Now I know with my aquatic monsters of the Great Lakes, I had to visit every Great Lake, and I had to do flyovers of Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. So, I mean, I some of my investigations do get very involved. Now, I've not been, because with COVID, I've
Yeah.
not been able to get much out of the United States recently. But if I can, I will do get up to Canada as often as I can, and I've been over to Europe a few times to do investigations as well. So around here, though, at least 4 or 5 times a year, I'm out there doing something.
Have you ever, because I know you touched on it, but that doesn't mean, I can say things all day long, but that doesn't mean I always do them. When we're talking about certain times that these things may happen, let's say you get a report, of a Bigfoot sighting, in Chestnut Ridge, something like that, and you go and investigate it. Do you ever write that down, date and time, and try to maybe catch it the next year?
Oh, absolutely. Now, I will tell you some of my other experiences real quick here.
Okay.
Whenever I went to graduate school up at IUP, my brother and I moved into a place up in Indiana that bordered White's Woods. So White's Woods is this, it's college land, so it's protected, so people do it for hiking and stuff like that, but there's no buildings on it or anything, so it's kind of like a stretch of land that's pretty well protected. So we had a house that bordered White's Woods, and we moved into this place, and in the summertime, it was always between the hours of 12 and 3 o'clock in the morning, which is scary because that's the witching hour. It always happened only, like I said, only in the summer between June and August. And it only happened on days that it wasn't raining. So this is a very precise time that this is happening. And my brother and I would hear this whoop sound. It was unusual. We had no idea what we might be listening to, so we let it go for the first year. Now, the second year we were up there, again, this was in June, these whoops start sounding up again, and again, like clockwork, between 12 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And we decided one time that we were going to go out and investigate what was going on. So one night, and I think that this was about 2 o'clock in the morning, these whoops started going off. Now, we never were brave enough to go out before to see what was making the sound, but he grabbed a baseball bat and I grabbed a sword, because I think that any of these stories has to have a sword involved.
I just thought that's what you grabbed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I grabbed. That's right. Well, I'm a medieval guy too.
Yeah.
Most of my studying was in medieval history, was in that particular time period. So I had to have a sword. So I went outside, and what was so odd is this is the first time we ever went outside whenever this whooping was going on, but you could almost feel it going through your body. It's hard to explain, but you could almost feel it vibrating, talking about frequencies and everything. So this whatever was making this noise was about 100 yards back into the woods. So we rounded our house and we started going towards it, and we never saw anything, but we knew instinctually that if we kept on going, maybe another few yards, we would see whatever it would be in the darkness, right? Mm-hmm. But when we got close enough to the point where we almost were in visual contact with it, it started to snarl at us.
Oh.
Now, I can still hear this, to this day. Whatever it was large enough to be taking in air, so you could hear it filling its chest up with air in order to make the snarl sound. But it was also very wet as well, too. You could hear there was moisture to the effect of the snarl as well. But the scary thing is, and it still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it, it was still whistling at the same time. It was still doing that whooping sound. So not only was it still communicating with these whoops, it was also able to snarl at us at the same time. And we ran. I mean, we ran like heck back there. We were athletic men in our 20s. We really had nothing to be afraid about. But whatever was making that sound told us to get the hell out of there, and we did. And it never came back again. Never came back again. So whenever you talk about, my first encounter with the unexplained, my first encounter with in your face what was going on, even though I can't definitively say I saw something, it was in the summer and it was between particular hours. So I always jot that down whenever I investigate, because I think it's very important to mark all that kind of stuff down.
That is amazing. Now, Ron, I know we are getting close to time. How can people get a hold of you? Where can people find your online presence? Do you have any events coming up?
Well, sure. Well, I'll tell you what. I know that I will be at the Kecksburg Festival. let's keep it in our prayers, friends, that everything goes okay with this COVID. It's impacted my family. I lost my father to it last year.
Sorry to hear that.
It needs to go. It needs to go away. It really does, And I'm supposed to be at Kecksburg this year, which will be the next to last week in July. I will also be at the Twin Lakes Arts Festival, which will be the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday over the 4th of July. So we'll end on the 4th of July. And I will be at these events, and of course other events will be coming along as we go on. But you can look for me on Facebook, Ronald L. Murphy Jr., which is my author page. Or you can friend me, Ronald Murphy Jr. on there is my regular friend page as well too. I have no problems with that. I'll give you my actual honest to goodness email, which is Ronald L. Murphy Jr. at yahoo.com. So if anybody wants to talk or report something, that's fine. Or if they want to argue as well too. I'm always up for a good debate because that's how we learn, right? We learn by listening to other people's opinions. I'm getting a website made up right now, so that's going to be here in the near future. And if you want my books, you can go to Amazon. You can contact me directly. And I'm also very proud to say that Walmart has actually picked up several of my books. They've picked up my book on vampires, and they also picked up my book on the aquatic monsters of the Great Lakes. So you can go to Walmart and get a couple of my books as well, too.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of that myself, my friend. Thank you.
And you have written several books. How many books have you written so far?
I've written about 21 books. I've written 2 novels. I also write a lot of poetry as well, too. So I have about 7 poetry collections out there. I've written some short stories as well, a self-help book, and then the rest will be on the unexplained and unusual.
So if you're a reader out there, definitely get on Amazon and check that out because there is a lot to go through.
Mm-hmm. There is, and like I said, these are ideas. These are conclusions that I've made through my own research. These are my own conjectures, but I'm happy to discuss any types of theories out there with anybody because that's how we learn.
So, Ron, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing. I definitely want to have you come back on because I feel like we're just scratching the surface of some of these stories. I really want to get into the Dogman.
Right. We could discuss that too. And actually, yeah, I'd love to come back and talk about the Dogman and how it relates to the Native American. I think that we would have a whole show right there. But actually, sir, it was my pleasure to be on your show. You're a fantastic host, and like I said, I'm very flattered you had me on.
Thank you very much, and you have a wonderful day, sir.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And with that, the fire is out. I want to thank you all so much for joining us this week. I don't know where you're listening or how you're listening, but I would appreciate it if you give us a rate and a follow or a subscribe or whatever your platform uses. That helps me out a lot. That way we can have more folks joining in the fun that we have every week. Now, also, don't forget to join us on all of our socials. We have Instagram, Twitter. The Twitter handle is Fireside Parapod. Parapod. We have our Facebook group, Fireside Paranormal Hub. Make sure you join that. We've had a lot of growth this past week as well. We have our Patreon that we set up. With that is a Discord server. We have our website, firesideparanormal.com, where you have all the merch. We got some really cool shirts and stickers and mugs, and I mean, you can even get throw pillows on that thing. There's really a lot of cool stuff in that merch store. Check that out. And again, anytime you want to contact me, Fireside Paranormal Podcast at gmail.com. If you have any comments on the show, if you have any guest requests, definitely email me. If you want to be a guest, let me know. That way we can get you on the schedule. We have a really fun schedule lined up. I think we're already into the spring. Actually, I think we're almost through the spring with our guest bookings. So we're looking to have a whole lot of fun with this. So until next week, everybody, don't be afraid, only believe.